Hello everyone, I'm Bailey Brosh here with Ben Crawshaw. We're really excited that you joined us today. We have a lot of great information to cover about church safety. So, Ben, tell us a little bit about your background in ministry and what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about how to ensure that your church is safe, or it could be ensure. I guess it depends on ensure. How would you say it?
Ensure.
Okay, yeah, so you say it differently than me, that your church is safe. And so I spent about 6 months last year doing research on church safety. Not a super exciting topic, but a vital topic, because you're coming across all of these articles and these blog posts about things that have gone, alarmingly wrong in a church setting. A church being a place that puts on these events for large groups of people every week. And so wanted to take all of this information, there's a lot of information out there, and get it into one place and really spend some time in this webinar talking to you guys about how to practically implement some of this stuff in your church. You asked about my background. I'm director of content at the Rocket Company, started ministry in 1998, so I've been doing this for a while. And I love small churches. I'm passionate about small churches. My first ministry job was in a small church. My dad's been a pastor for over 30 years of a small church. And everybody has a different definition of what small church is, right?
That's right.
But for those of you who are in the small church, man, all the different roles that you have to wear and how much you have to utilize volunteers, but how creative you are because of how creative you have to be. You don't have the budget. So
That's right.
You're figuring it out. I love you at the big churches too, but I'm passionate about small churches as well. So I'm going to let them know, Bailey, that if they stay till the end, so I suggest you put your cell phone on silent. I know you got a lot going on, you got all kinds of distractions, but try as hard as you can to just focus with us for a little while. And if you stay with us till the end, we're going to send you the background check blueprint. So it's going to walk you through background checks. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but we'll email that to you if you hang out with us until the very end.
That's right. So, Ben, we're going to jump in if you're ready. So, when you say church safety, what exactly are you referring to?
Well, there's a number of different components that relate to church safety when it comes to the church world. You have facilities, so you have buildings, and it's just like any other building. It's just like your house. You want to ensure that your house is safe. There's not places where people could slip and fall. There's not places where kids could, cut themselves on, sharp objects. Facilities is a part of church safety, and then you have people. So you have staff members who are there consistently and kind of those internal relationships like human resources. Then you have congregation members. Then you have child safety. Then you have insurance. We're just talking about all the things that help you protect your congregation. You think of the verse, a wise person sees danger and takes refuge, but a fool keeps going and suffers for it. So there's a lot of potential danger that could happen in a church setting, and we want to see it and take refuge, which means protecting ourselves and what we're doing.
Great. So how do most church leaders approach church safety today?
Well, as a church leader, you're just busy. Like, you have a lot going on. There's sermons, budgets, volunteers that you're trying to recruit. You have crisis, pastoral counseling, your own preparation time, your own family. So church safety, from my experience and having conversations with you, it's just another one of those things that we need to think about. We feel guilty for not doing more with. And for me, from my own experience as a church leader, it was just overwhelming. It's like, wait a minute, where do I start? Even sifting through all of the insurance options. How do I know which insurance, is a good fit for my church and which one isn't? Spending money on stuff that I may not necessarily see a return on. It's like money that you spend for things that you may or may not need.
Right.
Well, it's tough for us to spend money on stuff like that. And it's just, there's a lot of information out there, but it's just kind of scattered all over the place. So I used to think about it a lot. There would be times at night, or again, I would come across an article where something happened, or there was a case of sexual abuse that happened in a church with a volunteer and a kid. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't sleep. I'm sweating, I'm freaking out. I would think about it a lot, but I didn't do anything. And it was mainly because I didn't know what to do. Okay, so I've read these articles, this is alarming information. This makes me super worried and anxious, but I don't know what to do.
Where do we go?
Where do we go from here? And some of you may be able to relate to that. It's like, oh, okay, this is a big topic, and it can get pretty alarming pretty quickly, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do about it. It's kind of like for me hearing that weird sound in your car. You just kind of ignore it and hope it goes away. And I think anytime, Bailey, we come across these articles where you hear about a lawsuit happening, or you hear about, there's a situation with someone who was going to somebody on a church staff for pastoral counseling, and as a result of that counseling, something bad happened, or so the congregation member says in their family, and so they're suing the church for malpractice. Well, I'm just like, okay, that freaks me out a little bit. I'm just going to ignore that. That's not me. And
hope it doesn't happen.
Hope it doesn't happen to me, and hope it goes away.
Cool. Well, thank you for explaining that a little bit better. What's your goal today for our time together?
Well, again, spending all this time going into all these different facets of church safety, human resources, you have facilities, insurance, child safety. Again, it was just overwhelming and it's kind of confusing. And so I wanted to just bring it all into one place. That was the goal of Safety Rocket. And we don't have time to talk about all of that right now. But today in our time together, I want to turn hard to understand into easy to implement.
Great.
So take all this stuff that is like confusing or disjointed and get it all into one place where it makes sense. And my goal always is to talk practically, not philosophically. Like we could sit here all day and talk about trends in the church and where there's more risk for things that could happen and not happen. But I would rather us just talk about some practical things that you guys can put into place immediately.
I love it.
And what I've discovered is that church safety is a spiritual issue. That as a church leader, I am to shepherd the members of my congregation, the people from the community who come to my church, in as many areas as I can. And I'm not saying the work of, the total work of life change and guarding the heart of people in your congregation falls on you as the church leader. The Holy Spirit working through you, hopefully you have great volunteers and other great staff members. But as their leader, you are to shepherd them. And this includes shepherding them in a way that protects their safety. So the kids that come to your church, they need to be safe. The volunteers who come to your church, they need to be screened. And it's a spiritual issue. All of your facilities need to be safe. And just knowing that your church, my church, we're not above good business practices, and we're not above the law. There are some things that legally we have to comply with, just like businesses do, and certainly as people who are representatives of Christ in the community, in a body of in the body of Christ, we want to respect the authorities that have been placed over us and comply with what they ask us to do legally.
So speaking a little bit about some things that are important that we need to do but might be a little difficult sometimes, let's talk about background checks. Why are those important?
The church is a place, like we mentioned, that has a lot of people working with people. It's ministry. It's the people industry, so to speak. And so you have people who have a lot of access to other human beings and a lot of influence with them, a lot of time with them. And it should not be a surprise to anybody in today's day and age for you to require a background check. Somebody wants to work at your church. Well, here's what you know. They're going to have a lot of access to people. They're going to have a lot of time with people. They're going to be around families and kids. It shouldn't be like, oh my goodness, that's shocking that you want a background check from me. People should even, I believe, respect that your church has that kind of system when it comes to volunteers, key volunteers and staff members, that you want to make sure that you're protecting the other people who show up at your church. So it is kind of a red flag if somebody says, oh no, why are you trying to do a background check with me? No, we are trying to protect the people in the community who come to this church. And that's why they're important. It's because there's no better step to protecting people and protecting kids than doing thorough research and background check on the people who have access to them.
That's right. It's important. So how should a church start the process of even doing these background checks?
Well, I would personally just go to a company that specializes in that, a company who has spent a lot of time, doing a lot of work on how to do background checks specifically in the church and making sure that they're compliant with all the things they need to be compliant with legally. But I would suggest that churches use a company that screens across several checkpoints. So certainly in your research, make sure you find a company that screens across the National Criminal Database Search, National Sex Offender Registry Search, Social Security Number Verification, and Address History Trace. This is just at a bare minimum. I mean, more than this would be great, but certainly you want to make sure, okay, the background company that I'm using to provide this service of doing background checks for potential staff members or volunteers are at least screening across these checkpoints at a bare minimum. ProtectMyMinistry.com. So since creating Safety Rocket, a lot of people ask, all right, well, who would you suggest for background checks? They've been doing it for a long time. In the church space specifically, the church that I go to uses them for their services, and they work with churches all over the place, and they're just an expert at that area, that niche area of church background checks, and they're a great company to check out as far as that goes.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you. Well, some of you sent in some questions before this webinar, so thank you for doing that and participating. And we're going to go through some of those right now. So David sent in this question. Are there free resources out there to do a background check, or are the good ones paid?
Well, again, it's what we've talked about in Safety Rocket. It's difficult to spend money on something that you may or may not need. But I think to do a background check well, and to make sure it understands, use a company that understands things like, hey, there may be things that are registered nationally that aren't registered in a particular state.
Right.
That there may be some compliance that has some different variations based on the fact that you live in North Carolina as opposed to Oregon. That this is how to make sure that you're not discriminating based on race, gender, color, things like that. Just to make sure that you're doing it right and you're doing it thoroughly, I think you need to pay a company to do that. And I think it's money well spent. I think it's money that you'll be glad that you spent. And for me, it comes down to peace of mind, especially having toddlers, preschoolers, elementary age students in my church, to know that even if there are volunteers or staff members who don't have direct access to those kids, that I have made sure with thorough vigilance that we have taken some time to find out about the people that we are handing over the keys of ministry to. I think it's worth paying a company that's an expert at that. But that's a great question, David.
Yeah, it's very important. All right, so let's talk about the healthiest way to approach the hiring and firing process.
Yeah, and this is great. We, actually got a lot of questions about this, and I met with North Point Community Church where I used to work, and they have conferences where lots of churches come in, and so I met with their HR director and said, what are some of the most common questions that you get? And she said, we get a ton of questions about hiring and firing.
Can imagine.
And it's a difficult thing. Now, for most of us, understand the church to be kind of a fire at will kind of place. It can just be like, all right, we fire you because we just don't like you anymore, or something like that. But for most of us, and all of you who are watching, you want to treat people well. And people who apply to work at your church who don't get the job, and people who you have to let go of based on budget cuts or based on some type of behavioral or moral decision that was made. We still want to treat people with respect, regardless of what kind of decisions that we have to make. And that's why this hiring and firing process, it's so emotional with people. And you've been a part of it, I've been a part of it. Interviewing to go work somewhere and you don't get the job and you're kind of wondering why. Or hopefully not too many of you have been a part of the firing process, but I imagine a lot of us have had that experience in our lives. And it's difficult, it's emotional. And so we want to talk about a few things as it pertains to that. Number one is document the hiring process. So this is a great practice, practically, that you can put into place immediately, which is just to document the hiring process. Well, we don't know the hiring process. Well, that would be a great start for you. And you probably already have a process, you just haven't documented it. So what that may mean is, hey, the first thing that happens is I sit down with this candidate one-on-one. Okay, that's great. So make that a documented part of the process. And when you sit down with them one-on-one, you take notes, Maybe you sign it, have them sign it. Well, then number 2, I have them meet with the elder board. Okay, well, that's step 2 in the hiring process. Somebody takes notes on what was talked about. Maybe somebody signs it. Step 3 is they meet with staff members. Step 4 is we take them out to dinner. Document all of this as part of your process, because if people say, oh, you discriminated, or oh, you just don't like me. No, this was part of the documented process, and this is when we made this decision that candidate A was going to be a better choice than candidate B. And people say, again, can we discriminate religiously because we're a church organization? Yeah, absolutely. But you still want to document that. You still want potential employees to see something in front of them that says, hey, this is what we believe, and we will make a decision not to hire somebody if they don't line up with these beliefs. Again, you can have them sign it, you sign it, it's documented, and this just allows you to clearly explain to people who don't get hired why they didn't get hired. That's a great first step. And then create an employee handbook. So for instance, if you just fire somebody one day because they're late to work a lot, or they're a student pastor and the student ministry was dwindling in numbers, well, that feels very unfair to people. But if part of your employee handbook says that we expect people to be on time, we expect people to constantly look for ways to keep, the people that they work with engaged, or if people were looking at stuff they shouldn't look at on their work computers, or, inappropriate relationships that were happening, all of this can be explained in employee handbooks, and that's simply something you have people sign when they've read it. Some of them are going to skim through it and not read it as vigilantly as you want them to. But just think about this, Bailey, if you have to let somebody go, to be able to come back to this employee handbook and say, hey, it explains it right here. You signed it, which means you read it, and this is our reason for this firing. Even if I would even put in the employee handbook that we have the right to let people go based on budget cuts. So they can come back and just say, hey, don't want to catch you off guard here. I said budget cuts, you thought I just didn't like you. No, it is budget cuts,
Right.
and you can see right
It
here
happens.
that this is something that we have the right to do. That's a great way to just document the process. And then do regular performance reviews. So Bailey, let's say you're my boss, and I am just consistently late. So what happens sometimes in the church space is people will just say, I'm tired of you being late, you're fired. As opposed to you sitting me down and saying, hey, I noticed some things you're doing well through this performance review, but hey, I noticed that you've been consistently late to work, consistently late to staff meetings. And so there's going to be a 30 to 90 day probation period where I'm going to give you an opportunity to just improve in this area. But I want to make it clear to you that if you don't improve in this area, Ben, if you can't show up on time, I may choose to fire you because of that. And you're not saying you are, but you don't want to catch me off guard at the end of this probation period. Here's what that's doing. It is allowing me the respect of having a right, having an opportunity to right a wrong, to get better in an area where maybe I just haven't thought about it, or maybe there's some other reason why I'm consistently late. My kid is sick, or I'm just struggling with something in my personal life or at home, but I have time. And then you come back around, and it's either, hey, we need to do another probation period, or hey, things have gotten better, great job, Ben, or nothing has changed. I told you at the last performance review that this may result in termination, and it's going to do so at this point. But if you have those documented, and we have the employee handbook was documented, and then we document this termination period, then everything's been explained pretty clearly to me. And I do suggest, treat people with grace. You want to spell this out so if they go try to get another job, it's not like your word versus their word. Document what happened so that they can clearly explain to the next place they go, this is why they let me go, like budget cuts. So if you say they let me go, well, somebody else may think, well, they just weren't a good employee. No, it was budget cuts. This is the reason why. They loved me. They wanted me to stay. They just couldn't afford me. What a great thing for them to be able to take to their next potential employee to explain it to them. There's some gray areas here, but the key thing, Bailey, I believe, is just respect. You want to respect the people that want to work for you and respect the people who do work for you.
Awesome. Yeah, I like how you keep it the same across the board. It saves a lot of trouble in
Yeah.
the long run.
Yeah,
So,
documentation is the key. If you document stuff and people can see it, it clears up so many things that can go wrong in the hiring and firing process.
awesome. That's great. Well, we have a question from Robert. So Robert says, how do I get the congregation to buy into the need for safety?
Well, I say you just start every church service by reading them an article of something terrible that happened in another church. So I'm kidding, okay? I'm totally kidding about that. Don't do that. I do think, though, it starts with your internal leadership, and I do think in those cases, the deacon board or your elder board with your staff, you can, share some articles, some things that have happened. Again, for me, doing research with this, seeing the malpractice situation with pastoral counseling, it's like, okay, that's just good for me to know. Understanding some of the tension that has come from people being let go by church leaders, staff members let go. It was just good for me to be aware of that. It's the same idea of life insurance. By getting life insurance, I'm not claiming that I want to die. I am simply trying to set my family up to be able to transition in that process if something happens to me. And that's the way I would explain it to a church. It's like, hey, we want to have some life insurance for the safety of this church. And so we're going to spend some time that we're not going to see a direct result of. We're not going to see fruit from it immediately.
Right.
It's not like doing safety research is going to help your church grow immediately.
Right.
But you are building a healthier foundation as your church does grow. And I think it's just a thing that people need some exposure to and they need some knowledge about. And once you get some knowledge of it, I think people will be more motivated to pitch in. And I think, again, making it easy for them to understand will be helpful. And knowing that just like anything else in the church space, you get a couple volunteers on board, you can make a huge difference when it comes to the safety of your church.
Absolutely.
Great question.
All right, so name some good practices when it comes to protecting your church facilities.
Yeah, so again, facilities is something that we need to think about. You have some exterior threats. A church is a place that, people can kind of roam in and out of from the community. There's a lot of theft that happens within church space. There's, you have a lot of times in the church world where people have left purses there. There's a lot of people coming in and out of rooms. There's a lot of trust that's built in at the church, which is a great thing, but it does represent some, potential exposure. And we also have some other pieces of Safety Rocket where we do talk about handling church tithes, how to make those deposits, how to handle people that come in off the streets asking for cash handouts. But you're talking about, Bailey, specifically your building,
Yes.
premise, and your property. So a couple things that I think would be great. Again, there's so much we could talk about, but just to get you practically started, I want you to walk away and say, okay, those are some things that I could do pretty quickly and immediately. Number one is get a third-party walkthrough of your facilities. There's a lot of people that will do this. Could be someone, local fire department, a fire marshal, a police officer. You can get someone who works in the insurance industry to come by and look at your property for liability. Or you could just get a volunteer who works in construction. Or if you can't find any of that, just get another staff member. So you and I just walk through the church and we're just looking for potential areas of risk or harm. So we could walk through and say, you know what? There's a lot of shrubbery, in this particular area of our church that's close to the door entrance. Well, what does that mean? It means somebody could easily hide and then get into the church, okay? What about our, we don't seem, these doors are unlocked too much, or we don't have good visibility. People don't break into buildings in the daytime. They break in at night. So we don't have, good lights or sensor lights. Or we walk around and we see, okay, there's a lot of chemicals, cleaning chemicals that are exposed. We may walk through and say, we don't have a fire extinguisher, or we do and we don't know how to use it. So you want to walk through, you and someone else, walk through your church facility and just make notes. So just write down, it's a checklist. It's a honey-do list. It's the things that just need to be worked on when it comes to your church facility. Then I want you to keep a running list of the next 3 issues that can be fixed and addressed. So Bailey, think about your house after a family Christmas party. People leave and you look at your house and it's a wreck. And you just say, you know what, I'm going to bed because I cannot deal with all of this. This is how this list may feel. So the best thing you can do is say, okay, what are the three most critical areas? All right, there is a sharp object, around the sink area in our children's ministry area. Well, that probably needs to be addressed immediately because we don't want kids cutting themselves in our preschool area. So, identify the top three. Identify some things that you can do quickly and get them knocked off your list, and then you can pick the next three to address. But your facilities is gonna be so much safer if you just do these first two things, which is just go around, make a list. A lot of church leaders don't do that. And then just identify the next three and start working on them. You're already way down the field. And then a great thing is to have volunteer work days. So you have people in your church who, they're just great with construction. They're great with, landscaping. They're contractors. And if you ask them to lead a small group, they would say, no way, I'm not going to do it. Volunteer in our preschool ministry, no way, I would never do it. Will you help us with our church facilities? Absolutely. And it's a great opportunity to get people who are gifted in that way, who may not have other opportunities to serve that they are compelled by, to feel like they're a huge part of helping your church win. Cast some vision around, you know what? I want this place to look good, but I just want it to be safe. I don't want people from the outside to be able to come in, and I want the people who are here. I don't want people to slip and fall. I want people in wheelchairs to have access to the bathroom, access to our main sanctuary. Will you help me with that? A lot of people, man, they would love the idea to help you as a church leader with your church grounds and with your church facilities.
Awesome. So let's jump to child safety. Why is this such a vital issue, child safety?
Well, this is the place where, as a church leader, it keeps you up at night.
Yes.
And you start thinking through things that could happen or things that could go wrong, and it's breaking into cold sweats. And you used to work in children's ministry.
Yes, I did.
My wife used to work in children's ministry, and I remember one day, working in preschool, there was a kid, we couldn't find him. And we didn't know where he was, so he was in the cabinets underneath the sink, playing, hide and go seek or whatever. There was a time when a boy approached his mom and said, I ate peanuts. Well, he has a peanut allergy. And so it's just this moment where you freeze. And in the end, he didn't. I don't know if he was playing a joke or if he kind of misunderstood what he ate, but it's that heart attack moment, right? And so we want to really just think, not just think, but plan, and not just plan, but equip volunteers to be ready for these situations. And so, Bailey, the way I like to think about it when it comes to volunteers in the children's ministry area is to give them systems to just say, this is what we do in this situation. Now, you have a lot of great moms, a lot of people who have dealt with crazier situations with their own kids than you or I have in the church.
Right.
But still, you want to take the thinking out of it. I remember for me being in a preschool, classroom, and there was a toddler that he said he needed to go to the bathroom. And I was like, I don't know what the policy is for this. And I feel like I'm spending all this time thinking, I'm going to go try to find a supervisor and ask him, how do we handle this? But if you have systems ahead of time, then, okay, this is how we handle this.
Right,
it makes it go faster. And then it allows your volunteers to do what they're great at, which is loving kids, spending time with kids, and just pouring into them. Your volunteers in children's ministry area are going to spend more time at church with volunteers than anybody else growing up. This is their picture of church. And so you want them to have these policies in place and know what to do in certain situations so that they can just focus on loving them, pouring truth into them, raising up the next generation. So I don't feel like I have to convince you or too many people why it's an important issue. I think it's just kind of knowing what to do. That's the hardest part of all.
Where to start.
Right.
What are some important things for church leaders to know about child safety?
Well, I think the most important thing that you can know is what you don't know. So where are the areas where we need some documentation? And so, like, okay, do we have a fire escape policy? Working on Safety Rocket, coming across a custody case. So you have picking up kids in a ministry area, and there's a couple that was going through divorce. It's a real situation. And so someone who had lost custody was there trying to pick up their own child. So how do you handle that situation?
Right.
As a volunteer, I don't know what to do here. Are you even aware of the fact that, a dad has lost custody? Check in and check out. And for so many of you, you're in small churches, and there is so much, I know you and you know me, and so there's so much trust when it comes to, giving kids back to supervisors and guardians, but having a check-in, check-out policy is vital. It's vital to have because of the people that you don't know, and somebody who may show up off the streets, and they may show up and say, oh yeah, I'm here to pick him up. If you've built in all this natural trust, which again is great, where people just hand kids back to guardians, then that's when you could potentially do something wrong. And I think about my dad's church, it's great church, love it, but it would be easy for somebody to come in there and, pick up a kid or move with a kid, and that's just a real threat that we need to think about. So to answer your question, I put a bunch of policies in place with Safety Rocket: fire evacuation, weather emergency, a missing child procedure. What do you do if you can't find them? Power outage, check-in and check-out policy, a parent responsibility policy. That's another thing, Bailey, when it comes to the church space. Keeping kids safe is not just the responsibility of staff members and volunteers. Parents have a role in this. There are some things that they need to be held accountable to help you protect the children's ministry area of your church. A wellness policy, parent custody policy, what we were just talking about, media release form, then allergy guardrails. Certainly you want to be aware of kids who have allergies and what to do in that situation. But again, as a volunteer, I don't want to have to make that decision in the moment. I want to have a system where, okay, this is what we do, and so that I can focus on making sure this kid is safe and then spending time with these kids that I have a limited amount of time with. A diapers to potty guardrail. So how do we handle diaper change? How do you handle taking kids to the potty? What do you do as far as male volunteers in this situation? Discipline guardrails. Classroom cleanliness, handicap and special needs guardrails, security stickers, interview guide, teacher position description, ministry team commitment, child abuse, education. This list could go on and on. When you look at this, if you're watching this, you're probably thinking, whoa, this is too much. That's why we created all of this for you in Safety Rocket. It's already done. Spent the time, worked with the church leaders and the preschool ministry area leaders to say, let's just get these 20 documents into church leaders' hands, or so you could pass them on to children's ministry leaders and volunteers. They may not be perfect for what you want, but it's going to get the process started for you. And that's what I tell children's ministry leaders is just start creating a system, knowing that it can be improved. It may not be perfect, but it's better than having nothing. Something is better than nothing. A power outage plan or a fire escape procedure, an imperfect plan is still better than I don't know what to do. Fire alarm's going off. Good luck, kids, Something is better than nothing, and it can be edited and modified and improved. But that's why I just wanted to get all of this done for church leaders because it is so overwhelming. But the key thing to have is just documents, systems. This is how you train your volunteers. This is how you handle those situations.
And we want to make it super easy for you.
Absolutely.
So. All right, Pam sent in a question for us, and she was wondering, in your general church setting, where are the most important areas to place security cameras?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly at the doors, any doorways, if you can put some there. I like to think of a church building as something that you can create into sections. You may have a small church building, so it may be 2 sections or it may be 3 sections, but places that you can lock down. And we talk about that a little bit, but if your children's ministry area is a place where you can lock it, people can't come in and they can't come out, that's great. Why? Because what if a shooter walks onto your church property and they are in your main sanctuary? I know this is stuff we don't like to think about, but if there's a captain in that zone who can send a message over to the children's ministry area to lock it down, you keep shooters from getting into your children's ministry area. So if you have different zones, or if you're aware of potential violence or terrorist intrusions from the outside, you can move everybody into one zone and lock it down where people can't get in and out. But I think if you can have cameras at the entrance to all of these zones that you create in your church, those are important spaces to have them. So we can look and see that the children's ministry area is locked down, or the main sanctuary, or the fellowship hall and student ministry area. We just have some visibility there. And now, again, if you have the budget to do more cameras in more places, that's great. But I think at a bare minimum, the front door and these different lockdown zones would be a great place to start. And again, if your church is really small and you can pass communication on quickly, then I would still just identify some zones where you could lock down.
Awesome. So Ben, why did you create Safety Rocket?
Well, essentially, what I wanted for you was to not feel so overwhelmed by all of this. That
It's a lot to take in.
you hear these things, and there's so much other stuff that we could have talked about. We could have talked about, a shooter and how to handle that, or a potential violent intruder. We talk about having some, security members or plainclothes police officers on your premise every time your church meets. But I just wanted to take all the information that was out there, and there's a lot of information out there. Some of it's confusing, overwhelming, disjointed, and I wanted to get it into one place. But ultimately, wanted to create it so you'd have some peace of mind, to know we've at least thought about and planned what to do in situations like there's a missing child, or there's money that has gone missing from the offering plate, or a tree has fallen on the car of someone in our congregation. So I wanted to just give you practical stuff to help you in those situations. And the way I try to describe it is that Safety Rocket is a powerful online resource that compiles, so we brought it all together, curates, so filter through the stuff that's unnecessary, and clearly explains, this was my biggest goal with this, some of the vital information your church needs to be protected. This could be 60 modules. It could be books and books and books. But I wanted to get some of the vital information, Bailey, into one spot so that you guys can move through it quickly. So information, so stuff to learn and become aware of. Education, so knowledge about certain laws or practices. Application, so how do I put this into place immediately? And then operation, so what does this look like in the context of my congregation and my facility, and some done-for-you resources that can just beef up your operation when it comes to church safety right now. So Bailey, I wanted to address questions like these in Safety Rocket. How do you do volunteer background checks properly, thoroughly, and legally? We've already talked about that today. How do you fire a staff member ethically, respectfully, and legally? We've talked about that today. Does your church staff know where fire extinguishers are located and how to operate them? That is actually an important, vital question for you to know the answer to as a church leader. Is if a fire breaks out, everybody's going to look at a church staff member and say, what do we do? Well, you call the fire department, and if it's a small fire, you start trying to put it out. Well, what do you need for that? You need a fire extinguisher. That's an important thing for your staff to know. How should children's ministry volunteers handle toddlers who need to go potty? Are you covered if your student pastor gets in a wreck in your church van? What do you do if a shooter enters your church? I mean, you see how wide the range is of topics that fall under church safety. There's like 200 more questions that we could talk about, but I wanted you to have answers in these situations. And again, here's more things to think about. How many churches are ready if a congregation member sues a staff member for malpractice as a result of their pastoral counseling? I just wanted churches to be ready. How many churches have an employee handbook? How many churches have a written plan for what to do if a suspicious person enters their children's ministry area? I just thought, man, I would love it if there was a lot more churches and church leaders who said, you know what, we have a plan. So we feel like we know what we could do. It may not be perfect, but it's better than just sitting and saying, man, I never thought it would happen to us, or I just prayed that God would protect us. That's an important prayer to pray, but the wise see danger and they take refuge. Danger is a potential situation of a shooter entering your church. Taking refuge is to have a plan for what we're going to do. So I met with North Point Community Church. They have over 450 people on staff. And I thought about my dad's church, which has 125 total members. And that's on a really, really big day. They have 125 people there. I wanted a product that would be great for both. So I want this to span denominational lines. I want it to span church size. This isn't about startup versus mega church. These are things that are helpful for church leaders to know in any situation when it comes to dealing with volunteers, dealing with kids, dealing with staff members, or down the road, potential future staff members. I wanted this to be a product that fit for everybody, and that was the goal in creating Safety Rocket.
Awesome, I love it. Well, what will people get when they jump into Safety Rocket today?
Yeah, so what we want is, we're passionate, and I'm passionate about you as a church leader. getting some vital information and not just walking away from this webinar saying, oh yeah, that was good, that was helpful, but stuff you can implement immediately. I mean, imagine taking these 20 documents to your children's pastor and saying, hey, all these things that keep you up at night, maybe this will help. Watching these trainings as a team, going through stuff together, listening to it in your car, and just kind of information, education, application, operation on how to move the ball down the field when it comes to safety rockets. So module 1 is about background checks. It's 6 modules. So think of it as 6 different courses, 6 different pieces to this information product. Module 2 is about human resources, all about the hiring and firing. Facilities, we talked about that just a little bit. So much more that we can talk about. Child safety and getting all of the child safety documents that we mentioned. Insurance, we didn't have time to address that today. Safety procedures, we didn't have time to address those today, like a lockdown policy, like a cash handout policy. When you jump into Safety Rocket today, you're going to get these 6 modules given to you over 6 months. And we love at the Rocket Company rewarding people who act quickly, and we are passionate about you, having the peace of mind that comes with knowing you've thought through these operational things, that your staff and your volunteers are equipped in these situations. And so we want to reward you for acting quickly with the volunteer recruitment and development system because, Bailey, here's what we know. For most churches, almost all churches, the way that they're going to make sure that they're safe is by having volunteers who are bought in.
Exactly.
Yeah, so if your facilities are going to be in a position where that they're safe for your kids, it's probably going to require some volunteers. If you're going to know how to handle a situation, if a suspicious person is in your children's ministry area, it's going to involve volunteers. Volunteers are a huge part of this. And the more volunteers you have who understand this, the safer your church is going to be and the more peace of mind that you're going to have. And it's a $99 value, but we're going to throw that in if you jump in quickly because we want you to feel equipped with the volunteers that you have and that they have all the resources that they need to make sure that your church is safe. So to recap, this is all the stuff that you're going to get with the Volunteer Recruitment and Development System ebook. There's training, MP3s, an interest form, application, interview questions, recruitment checklists. All of this is part of the volunteer recruitment and development system. So now I'll recap everything that you're going to get. Those 6 modules of Safety Rocket, plus the volunteer recruitment and development system. We're going to throw in one more thing because we feel like this is a key part of what we're talking about as well, the staff development system. So how do I develop staff members, not just when it comes to seeing the vision of things like church safety, but just developing them as human beings, as leaders, as the future, as the next generation of leadership for the church, the Big C church at large. And I don't have time to jump into what all comes with the staff development system, but just know that we're going to throw that in as well. So you can see all of this, the 6 modules plus the 2 add-on systems. That's what you're going to get when you jump in to Safety Rocket today. Now, Bailey, questions. These are questions for you to think about. If all this did was help you take care of the people you've been entrusted with, would it be worth it? Would that money be worth it if you said, you know what, these are the people I've been called to shepherd, and I want to see danger and take refuge. I don't want to be simple. I don't want to keep going and suffer for it. I want to see danger and take refuge. Would it be worth that money? Would it be worth that money to spend to ensure that the children at your church are safe? If it helps you protect your congregation with the same vigilance you protect your family and your house at home, you could say, I have peace of mind at home because I know my kids are safe, my spouse is safe. I have that same peace of mind when it comes to the church, the staff, the congregation, and the building. If all this did was fight the reputation that churches operate without diligence, that churches don't use wisdom, they don't have caution, would it be worth it? If we could change the mindset in the marketplace as to the kind of businesses and the kind of operations that the church runs, would it be worth it? If we said, yeah, hey, parents, there's no safer place for your kids in this community than at our church. There is no place where we're going to be better stewards of your money than at the church. There's no place that we're going to make sure that elderly people and people with special needs can move around this church with ease. That if something happens, if you get into a fender bender in the church parking lot, we know what to do. That we're not going to allow someone to enter into this church with violent intentions uncontested. That we have thought through this in the most vigilant way that we possibly can. And I believe, too, Bailey, I believe this is true. is that a safe foundation that will help you grow without putting your staff or your congregation at risk. Because we want our churches to grow.
We do.
You've been a part of churches that were growing. A bunch of people start showing up, and all of a sudden you have a preschool room that has one volunteer with like 27 kids, right?
Yes, been there.
All of a sudden you have people showing up that you don't know. Wait, for a while there, I was just handing babies back to mama, and I know mama, and now I have kids that I don't know and people that I don't know showing up to pick them up. And so you want to grow, yes, but you want to grow in a healthy way, meaning we can get bigger, we can scale without putting people at risk. That we can scale, well, we're going to scale our systems too. We're going to be ready for all of these things that we're talking about today. And you can see why. That is a great deal at $892. That is absolutely that peace of mind, and it is 100% worth it. What we're going to do today, you jump in, safetyrocket.org, $74 a month over 6 months. So that's almost 50% off of that deal that I was talking about. You go to safetyrocket.org, and you can jump in immediately. Get all the stuff that we talked about. The 6 modules from Safety Rocket, the 2 bonus systems that we talked about. You can get that at 50% off of what we're talking about. So $74 over 6 months. Well, here's what's great about that, is you can meet with different volunteers each month. You can watch the training videos together. You can print out the resources or put your own logo on them and put those into play immediately. And I think, Bailey, it's all this overwhelming information that we talked about, thinking about it over the course of 6 months, I think helps it seem a little more manageable.
Sure.
It's taking a class without feeling like you have to know everything about the class when the class starts. So this is 6 months of my research that will be utilized for you over 6 months of learning, implementation, operation, changing the game when it comes to what your staff is motivated by and your volunteers are motivated by when it comes to keeping things safe for your church and your facilities. So I think it's an expert staff safety position for $74 a month. Not for life, not over the long term, just for 6 months. For 6 months, you're getting access to all the people that I've met with, lawyers and HR directors and insurance agents and police officers, and done all this research to find out, okay, what do you need to know? Well, for $74 a month, you don't have to pay salary, you don't have to pay insurance. You jump in immediately, and that's what you get at safetyrocket.org. You can open a new tab in your computer right now, type in safetyrocket.org. It'll walk you through how to get access to this and how to get those bonuses immediately. Because it comes down to 2 choices, which is just to walk away and this be another thing that you think, yeah, I should, and it's going to keep you up at night, or make decisive action and see an immediate change with your staff, your congregation, your key volunteers, and just peace of mind. If all this did was give you peace of mind, would it be worth it? Absolutely. So, Bailey, anything else you want to add to this?
I would just say that you don't want to miss out on those bonuses. It's $200 value right there, and that's some really good information in those bonuses. So I would sign up today if you can. And yeah, I think Safety Rocket would be a great choice for you and your church.
Yeah, we just appreciate it. I know you're busy, you have a lot going on, but you care about the safety of people in your church. That's why you've taken time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this training, and I'm so grateful for that. Now what we're encouraging you to do is to take that training one step further and implement it. Actually see a change, see a difference with the people around you. We're going to send you the background check blueprint because we promised you would if you stayed to the end. So look for that in your email and look for upcoming webinars from the Rocket Company, free resources and training. But before we go, jump on safetyrocket.org. You're going to be so glad you did for the peace of mind that you have.
Absolutely.